All right. Good evening, everyone. First, just doing a sound check. Am I audible? Excellent, Ankur. Thank you. Thank you for confirming. Thank you. Good evening, Shivangi. Good evening, Satya. Good evening, Avinash. Hello, Vandana. Good evening. Good to see you here. It's always a pleasure to meet all students. Thank you. It's 9:28. We'll wait for another 2 minutes and then we'll start at 9:30 sharp. I'm very good, Ankur. How are you? It's been a while. How are you keeping? बस लगे ही रहो यार, लगे रहो, इसी का नाम जिंदगी है. Hi, Diksha. Good evening. Very excited. Thank you. Always a pleasure. It's an honor to teach you again. Thank you. Good evening, Shashwat. How are you? Good, good. Very good. All right. Good evening, one and all. Welcome to the crash course on Indian polity. Good evening, everyone. Let's start with class. Let's go through what today's class is about. So, we're here for the prelims crash course for polity 2020. This is my name. This is my Telegram channel for reference. Let's look at what we're going to be doing in today's 2 hours that have been given to us. First, I'll give you my educator profile. Then we will look at the course brief, the teaching methodology, and the reading references. Then we'll start with certain basic concepts called the rule of law, procedure established by law, and due process of law. You will then understand the need for a constitution versus other laws. What is the general hierarchy? How do we intend to go about it? How do they stand in comparison? We can obviously look at the concept of majorities. We'll understand what different majorities exist. Why do they exist in the form that they do? We will look at their utilities. We'll understand how to largely shape them up. We'll also look at the kind of laws that exist and how to pass them. We will look at laws that change the constitution. We will look at laws that don't change the constitution. Are there of further types and stuff like that? One of the most important part of class today is going to be the 4 golden rules to studying the constitution. What I've basically done is everything from the preamble till the 12th schedule is nothing but an application of 4 very simple rules. If you get these 4 rules right, I give you my word, you will not have to memorize a single line as far as law, polity, or constitution is concerned. This will help you cross check your answers, make very smart, 100% accurate guesses, and get your questions right. And I'd like to also teach you the preamble today. So we've got a lot to cover in today's class. We'll first look at a major educator profile. So my name is Atish Mathur. I'm legally a qualified lawyer, and I have been a teacher at Hajiram and Ravi Institute for IAS Exam in New Delhi. It is one of India's largest institutions. We get about 15,000 students a year. I've been teaching here for the last 7 years, and I'm so happy to see a couple of ex-students also here on the same platform. It is very delightful to see a couple of familiar faces in class today. I teach 2 subjects mainly at Vajiram. I teach polity and governance as a part of the general studies course. And for the last 3 years, I've also been teaching Indian government and politics, which is a part of the political science optional paper 1 section A, again at the same Vajiram and Ravi Institute for IS examination in Delhi. So that's about me. Very happy to be here to reach out to more people beyond the physical medium of a coaching class. And let's hope this is a fruitful association in the times to come. All right. So what is the course about? Let me be very, very clear about this. Right. Good to see you, Lombard. Very happy to know that ex-students from Insights are also here on the platform. It just makes the world a smaller one to live in, and so happy to see familiar faces all across the board. Hi, welcome all. So let's look at the course details in a little bit of understanding. Right. So first things first. This is the crash course for the prelims exam. This is not a full course. This is not supposed to give you the current affairs analysis. This is not supposed to get into in-depth understanding of complicated political developments. This is to make sure that you get a minimum of 80% of the questions right in the prelims exam. This is primarily what my target is. And to achieve that target, I will focus on the why before the what. So if you understand the why, you will never have to memorize the what. And even if you do tend to forget the what, you can always cross check the what because you would always know the why. That's the primary philosophy behind a course like this. You've scheduled a total of 15 classes for you. Each of these will be for 2 hours each on weekdays. That's Monday till Friday from 9:30 p.m. till about 11:30 p.m. We'll give you 2 days a week to revise whatever has been taught through the course of this week so that you're able to understand what lies ahead. The class will primarily be taught through presentations such as these, and at the end of the class, copies of the same presentation shall be uploaded on the discussion portal so that you can revise, you can take your own notes, and you can understand the larger domains of whatever has been discussed in class. Now, having said that, before you come for class tomorrow, I will already give you a reading assignment that has to be read beforehand. And for the very same purpose, you will get specific chapters that you have to read from a specific reference book. You can read it from any book as long as you read the corresponding chapters. That's all that matters. Now, uh, for the purposes of the prelims exam, I've always believed Lakshmikant is more than enough to sail you through. So even if you're not reading the Lakshmikant, you're reading, say, a Vadiram Yellow book, or you're reading a PM Bakshi or any of those books, it really doesn't matter. If you're reading primarily from Lakshmikant, that's the layout that I'd like to follow for class here. That should be more than enough. And the key part is you have to read Lakshmikant very, very selectively. For the prelims, more than 65% of Lakshmikant is absolutely pointless. You don't need it. It's factual, it's inconsistent, it is moderately analytical, which is not needed. So for the very same purpose, I have been doing this exercise for a few years now. My students here at Vanjiraman Insights will collaborate with this fact that every year I release a reading list from Lakshmikant, which is basically a chapter by chapter, page by page, column by column, line by line, table by table list of what needs to be read and what needs to be left out as far as the Prelims 2020 is concerned. It reduces your reading of Lakshmikant at the most, to about 50 to 75 pages, depending on how good your grasp is. And this is all you really need to do as far as the prelims exam is concerned. Now, I have already uploaded the very same list on your discussion portals, which you can access. I've already posted them up earlier this evening. You can take a printout of this. You can reference it before and after class. So whatever we discuss in class will always be +1. Lakshmikant will tell you the what, I will tell you the why, and with the why and the what, you will ace polity as far as the prelims in 2020 is concerned. After I finish each subtopic in the 2 hour duration, I will take a 5 minute break and I will entertain questions from whatever we have discussed in class so that your doubts get cleared as and when we go around it. And of course, we will also schedule doubt clearing sessions after every subsequent number of lectures so that if there's anything that has come to your attention after reading things at home, we'll be able to address it in the doubt clearing session as well. But largely speaking, for example, I finish majorities. I'll take 5 minutes of questions on majorities, and then we will continue with the rest. So that's the idea. So these are the course details, and let's get into the course right away. We first start with something called rule of law. Okay, it's a very abstract concept. It's a very, very over-analyzed concept. It's an overdone concept. But let's very quickly and let's very simply understand what this is. The idea of rule of law, so to speak, a complicated, fancy term, actually comes from something called the evolution of man. So what had happened was, back in the day, back thousands and thousands of years ago, man used to live individually. Man used to live in the forests. Man used to live in isolation, used to hunt, used to build a house, used to take care of everything on its own. And nobody really lived in a companionship, so to speak. From this, we slowly started living in communities. The basic idea was we started living together because we were able to secure each other, we were able to live with each other, we were able to take care of common needs. From communities, we slowly transformed into societies where a larger group of people started living together. And from societies, we then moved to civilizations. From civilizations, we progressed to empires. And the world that we live in today is defined by countries. That's the idea. This is where rule of law comes from. So the larger idea was that ever since man evolved, right from living in a forest, right from living in a forest to today living in the format of countries, what basically happened was organization. People started living together. And then they thought, all right, we're living together, we're doing the same thing. Let us figure out a way to better organize ourselves. So, what basically happening was household one, household two, household three, household four, and household five. Everyone was largely living together. Now, each of these households were performing all the functions themselves, which basically meant each of these households independently went and hunted, independently gathered food, kept their surroundings clean, secured each of their houses individually. And this was too much work. Why were five people doing all things together? A smarter way was, let us say, two of these houses hunted, the third house gathered, the fourth house cleaned, and the fifth house secured, all of them combined. This meant they could all live together, they could divide functions, and primarily live with ease. That was the fundamental purpose. Convenience was where rule of law came from. So if functions had to be divided, then each house in their own way had to decide what was right, what was wrong, what was the good hunting principle, what was the bad hunting principle, how were we gathering stuff, how were we distributing whatever we had gathered and hunted, what were the cleaning schedules like, how are we planning to secure the households, all of those things. And that is when it was decided that we will have certain common principles that we will govern ourselves by. And that, in its earliest stage, was the birth of rule of law, a set of principles that people would abide by, a set of principles that you would always adhere to. Now, this leads to a very, very simple question. The question is, these principles back in the day were called customs, then they were called religious beliefs, then they were called societal norms, then they were called civilization principles, then they were called empire rules. Today, they're called rules, regulations, and laws. But they're largely the same. It's essentially a way of distributing function amongst people. Now, I have a very simple but a very important question to place before you. Do you trust, very simple question, do you trust the prime minister or the office of the prime minister? The answer will always be we all trust the office of the prime minister. No matter who is in the prime minister's chair, it's the office of the prime minister that requires utmost trust. This is the difference between rule of law versus the rule of man. Do you trust the person in power or do you trust the laws that govern the person in power? No doubt. The person in power has made the law. We understand that. But this is like a speed breaker. This is slower. A law cannot be changed overnight. A person can change overnight. Authorities can change overnight. But the law doesn't change overnight. So the basic question was, what should you choose? Should you choose rule of law or should you choose rule of man? Most nations in the world chose rule of law. So what we basically did was we said there are going to be a bunch of rules, we could call them law, that everyone would follow. And whatever the change is, a good change or a bad change, must first happen with the law. The law is above everything. It's above the president, it's above the prime minister, it's above the home minister, it's above the election commission, it's above the CAJ, it's above anybody and everybody that you can think of. Whatever powers the president has is because a law gives the power to the president or the power to the prime minister to exercise it. If the election commission of India can send a notice to a political party saying that, hey, what you're doing is probably inciting communal violence. The Election Commission of India gets that power, gets that authority because of law. This is called rule of law. So, rule of law is basically a concept given by this person called A.V. Dicey. It comes from a Latin word called lex supremus, which basically means the law is supreme and nothing is above the law, which means everything in the country, everything, everything. The lex rex nena is the same thing as lex supremus. That is altered Latin and there is original Latin, so don't worry, they mean the same thing. Supremus is another Latin word which means the same thing, so don't worry about it. So it basically meant that law is supreme. No matter who you are, no matter where you come from, you will always bow down before the law. And that is a choice that everybody had to make. And most countries in the world made that choice. So the idea was you first create law, and under the law, you create institutions which will then ensure that the law is followed. And that was the primary principle. The law becomes above everybody else. Now, here's the question. We are a bunch of citizens. We're going to interact with the government. This interaction between the citizen and the government is going to be regulated by the law. So the idea is we as citizens are going to give up our powers of self autonomy, of powers to rule ourselves. We're going to surrender our powers, give it to the government. The government is going to consume the very same powers, consume the powers in the very same context, and then will make sure that it is returned to us in the form of some favor or another. And that is primarily what we are referring to. We are referring to an arrangement, a relationship between the citizen and the government to make sure that citizens are going to surrender their power to the government. The government is going to consume the same power and then is going to give us something back. This is actually very common and very, very simply done. For example, let's take the case of Amazon. All of us have heard of Amazon. We've all ordered from Amazon at some point of time in our lives. We are a customer. We pay to Amazon. Amazon processes our payment and in return gives us the product of our choice of a specific quality within a specific amount of time. This is a very simple form of what is called a contract, a simple commercial contract. The idea is we as citizens have the exact same contract with the government. So what happens is we as citizens surrender our autonomy in the form of votes. We surrender our will in the form of taxes. What is payment for Amazon are votes and taxes for the government. The government processes these votes and taxes, consumes power out of this, and in return, as a return gesture, gives us security and welfare. If this is a commercial contract, this is called a social contract. Now, this means there is going to be a relationship between the citizens and the government. The same way there was a relationship between the customer and Amazon. That is why Amazon has terms and conditions. Amazon had something called a warranty. Amazon has a return policy. So do we. This relationship between the citizens and the government now has to be figured out. Will you govern this relationship on a come as you may basis or a do as you play basis or a come as you please basis, depending on you? Or would you run this relationship on the basis of a bunch of rules? This is how rule of law becomes a part of legal systems. Rule of law allows for the citizens of a country to communicate with the government of a country so that the relationship, the communication between the citizens and the government is fair, it's transparent. Whatever the relationship is, whatever power the government gets, whatever it is that the citizens are going to give the government is largely going to be based on law. And that is how the rule of law comes into actual practice. Clear on this? So the idea basically is to come up with rule of law. So we figured out by now, rule of law, very, very simply, is to ensure relationships between the citizen and the government are fair, and are run by a simple set of principles called law. So we figured this out, that we must have a law. We can't trust people in power. People can go crazy. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. So let's not do that. Let's run it by law. Now, the real question is, are all laws the same? Do we need to make a bigger law more than any other law? Do we need to ensure that there needs to be a hierarchy of laws? Now, this depends from country to country. You must understand, India has a very, very different past. India's past comprises of imperial rule. Over 200 plus years of British rule not only makes, for example, 200 years of British rule not only makes us, fear foreign government, it makes us fear government in general. Because back in the day, even the British administrative systems had Indian people who were a part of civil services, who were a part of the British Army, who also were often perpetuating violence on ourselves. So the general fear of government always existed. Second, you must understand, India is not a voluntary federation. In the US, the states decide to come together and then create the United States of America. In the US, the state governments are created before the central government. That's not the case in India. In India, you created the central government first, and then we organized our states. We made states come to be a part of India. The reorganization happened. It was sometimes pleasant, it was sometimes not pleasant. Instruments of accession, etc., were signed, but that's the larger idea, which means federalism was a major constraint. We had to make sure that when we are including states, when we're adding regional territories, they're not scared. They know that they will be given a good deal. There was a need to comfort the states, comfort provinces that listen, don't worry, become a part of India, join us, we'll take care of you, we'll take care of everybody, including your people. So federalism was a very important constraint. Third, fairly importantly, the socio-economic indicators of India. When we became independent, if I remember correctly, our literacy rates were around 16%. Our female literacy rates were around 8%, which basically meant barely anybody in this country could read and write. You could not trust people to make their own decisions. That is also one of the reasons we did not choose rule of man, because people were not literate enough to choose wisely. So we had to provide for those. Keeping all of those reasons in mind, India adopted rule of law. And not only India adopted rule of law, we said we are going to have a supreme law, a law above everybody else, a law which will make sure that all other laws are in sync, are in place, are in line, are in order. That's the idea. So let's figure this out and let's try to get this part right. So the idea is, very simply put, we have something called rule of law, which basically means law is supreme. Now, what happens in India is we say all laws are not equal. We create a master law, a supreme law. We call it the Constitution. And we make sure that all other laws in this country are going to abide by the Constitution. So Constitution becomes the supreme law of the land. At the end of the day, the Constitution is also a law. The difference is it is a superior law. And that's the basic idea. So you basically have two kinds of laws in the country. You have civil laws and you have criminal laws. All civil laws and all criminal laws will always abide by the Constitution. The Constitution becomes the basic document. Why? Because the Constitution makes sure that the rights of the people are assured so that our fears of imperialism don't come true. It provides for a relationship between the center and the state governments so our federal units don't have to worry about anything. It makes sure that there is a format for governance and development because our socio-economic indicators are slightly not very impressive at the time of independence. That is the idea of rule of law. To make sure that yes, India has rule of law, and when India has rule of law, it basically means the Constitution is the supreme law, and all laws fall under the Constitution. They will abide by the principles of the Constitution. Any law which violates the Constitution to that extent will be declared invalid. We will look at this in more detail when we study fundamental rights in the classes to come. But the larger idea is no law can violate the Constitution. That's the basic idea. More specifically in the Constitution, Part 3. We'll come to that eventually in the times to come, but this is the larger idea. So do we understand this? Good. So I still have a very simple question. And my question is, fine, law is supreme. Law is the best thing that could have happened to us. There's nothing better than law. But the question is, don't you think we should keep a check on the law? If people can get corrupt, so can laws, because the people are making those laws. So somebody can make a very nasty law, a draconian law, a dangerous law, and the law itself can then violate the rights of the very people for whom the law was supposed to take care of. How do we make sure that happens? How do we make sure the law is supposed to be right on point, right on agenda to make sure this works effectively? We must keep a check on the law. Is the law any good? Is the law going to serve any larger purpose? It's a very, very important question to actually begin with. And now let's look at what we like to largely call tests on rule of law. We figured out the law is supreme. We figured out all laws are not equal in India. The biggest and the superior law is Constitution. Under the Constitution, all laws are equal. No law can violate the Constitution, which basically means India is a constitutional supremacy because India has chosen a rule of law, and in rule of law, India's supreme law is the Constitution. Nothing, no law made by the parliament, no judgment given by the Supreme Court can violate certain principles of the Constitution. That is the fact, because India has chosen law over the people who make the law, because rule of law is more stable, more reliable, more trustworthy than the rule of man. Now let's figure out the very tests that we are referring to. How does this work? This basically means two things: procedure established by law and due process of law. Let's figure this out. Fair enough. The law is the best thing that can happen to us. But the question is the law deserving our praise? Is the law serving the very purpose? Is the law good in its nature? There are two ways to figure this out. The first is procedure established by law. This basically means if a law has been passed through the right process, it doesn't matter what's in the law. Doesn't matter how draconian or good or bad or how dangerous the law is. As long as the law has been passed through the right process, it's a valid law. So, for example, there is a law X which has been passed by the Lok Sabha, then by the Rajya Sabha. It has been assented to by the President, has been published in the Gazette of India, and has been enforced. By simple principles of procedure established by law, there's nothing wrong with it. There could possibly be a law like this. This law would mean anybody who's wearing a black t-shirt like I am, has glasses and has a beard should be shot at 11:30 p.m. This means after the class is done today, I would possibly get shot. So what? It's a law. It's been passed by the right means. The Lok Sabha has passed it. The Rajya Sabha has passed it. Doesn't matter. It's been passed. By procedure established by law principles. Thank you, Shashank. I hope the Supreme Court saves me. But let me get back to this. So by this basically means the law is fine. There's nothing wrong with the law. That is why you need to look at something more. Because if a law like this existed, I would possibly be dead by 11:30. And that, for most people, might not be traumatic. But for a few, it still might be. That is why we need to look for something deeper, which basically means due process of law. There was law X, which was passed for reason Y. The law is being implemented in such a way that it is not fulfilling the reason why. This means the basic object of the law is now under question. This is called due process of law. I'll give you examples of this, don't worry. So let us say, this is a real example. There is a law in India called the Prevention of Corruption Act. Okay. Now, in this law, there is a provision called Section 19. This provision says, whenever a senior officer, or for example, this provision says, the permission of the senior officer is required to prosecute the junior officer in the cases of corruption. This law basically means if a junior officer has committed a corruption act, before you start any proceedings against the junior officer, you must take permission from the senior officer. Now, why do you think a law like this would have been made? This is your law X. What is your reason why for law X? The reason this was made is because fraudulent complaints should not be filed against the junior officer so that the junior officer can work independently and can work in absolute focus towards the purpose. This was why you made the law. And how is the law getting used? The law is getting used for a different reason, Z. The senior officer and the junior officer are both hands in glove in corruption. They're both jointly being corrupt. So obviously, the senior officer is going to save the junior officer, and that is in trouble. So you created law X for reason Y, but it is not being used for reason Y. It is actually being used for reason Z. Due process of law has been violated. And ladies and gentlemen, as of today, Section 19 of the Prevention of Corruption Act is actually currently a pending case, pending in the Supreme Court. Because if the Supreme Court decides, then they would eliminate Section 19 from the Prevention of Corruption Act. In the same way, I'll give you a more prominent example. You may have heard of something called the Information Technology Act. Okay? The Information Technology Act. Now, back in the day, this act had a provision called Section 66A. Under Section 66A, the government could arrest anyone for digitally, electronically spreading violence, for spreading hatred, for spreading a lack of peace in the country or a community at large. This is your law X. This law X gave the government the power to arrest anybody who would cause a lack of harmony in the country. What was the purpose? The purpose was to prevent instability in the country, to make sure societal law and order existed. This was why the law was made. Unfortunately, the law is being used for completely different reasons. So, what happened was the government started arresting people for dissenting against the government, for posting opinions against the government, for seeing things that the government might not necessarily believe in, more views opposite to the government. This was the problem. Law X, created for reason Y, but used for reason Z. A 21-year-old lawyer called Shreya Singhal challenged Section 66A in the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said, you're right. Section 66A violates something called Article 19, which is basically a fundamental right, which gives the freedom of expression. And why did the Supreme Court say so? Supreme Court said, there's nothing wrong as far as the procedure of the law is concerned. It was passed by the parliament, assented by the president. There's nothing wrong as far as procedure is concerned. But you're using a law for completely different reasons. So in the landmark judgment of Shreya Singhal versus Union of India, the Honorable Supreme Court of India declared Section 66A as invalid because of due process of law. Clear on this? So this is basically testing the law. So what do you understand? You understand rule of law, which basically means the law is supreme. The Constitution is the most supreme law, and all other laws, civil and criminal laws, are beneath the Constitution. Whether a law is good or not, this could be a law, this could be an article in the Constitution, this could be a section in any civil or criminal law. We use two tests: procedure established by law and due process of law. This is to check procedure, this is to check intent. Now, let me make this very clear with respect to the prelims. Procedure established by law is directly in those exact words mentioned in the Constitution under Article 14. Okay? But due process of law, over a period of time, through various Supreme Court judgments, through various verdicts of the Supreme Court, has also been declared as a part of the Indian legal system. So, is procedure established by law mentioned in the Constitution? Yes. Is due process of law mentioned in the Constitution? No. Are both of them accepted practices in India? Yes. So if you get a prelims question that says, is procedure established by law a part of the Indian Constitution? Yes. Is due process of law explicitly mentioned in the Indian Constitution? No. Are both of them legal principles of India? Yes. Both of them very much are. One is explicit, one is implicit, which means one is direct, the other is indirect. Now, let's do this logically. Okay. You're basically trying to figure out whether the procedure for the law is right or the intent for the law is right. Think of it. Think of it like Windows XP migrating to Windows Vista to Windows 10. Windows XP solved a certain number of problems. Then Vista did. Then 10 did. So tell me something. Very honestly, you can just write PEL or DPL in the comments box and let's see how this figures out. Or right, it's a very simple question. What do you think we discovered first? To check procedure or to check intent? What do you think we discovered first? Procedure or intent? Okay, procedure. It struck us first to check procedure because that was right in front of us. Checking intent is an evolved idea. It's like your parents asking you, what do you really want to do? What do your parents ask you? Is the school okay? Is the college okay? Is the school on time? What do your parents rarely ask you? Are you happy in the school? Have you made friends in school? Are you liking the way the teacher teaches? That's intent. But what do parents mostly ask you? They ask you, is the school on time? Is the teacher coming on time? Are the classes happening regularly? Procedure. Procedure will always come to the human mind first. So we've clearly figured this out. Procedure came first and then due process. No, it is not subjective, Naina. It is absolutely true. Legal history across all constitutions of the world, procedure established by law as an idea came to legal systems much before intent did, because intent checks required an active judiciary, required a proactive legal system, proactive civic society. But procedure was you were supposed to do this. You did not do this. So there is a problem. Intent is, does this actually make sense? Are we doing it for the right reasons? It's an evolved idea. So now tell me something. In the history of democracies of the world, yes, a DPL is a more qualitative idea. In the history of democracies of the world, what came first, UK or US, which is an older democracy? What is an older democracy? Is UK an older democracy or US an older democracy? UK. Exactly why. Procedure established by law is a UK concept because it came in UK. Because UK is older, they thought about it first. US is a relatively more recent democracy, a more evolved one. So due process of law originated in the US. A simple way to remember this in case you forget. So what I was basically trying to tell you was this, that if you're largely worried about remembering it, procedure established by law is an older concept. UK is an older democracy, so UK idea. Due process of law is a newer concept. US is a newer democracy, so is a US concept. Simple as it is. Both are a part of the Indian legal system. Both are used in constitutional interpretations. Procedure established by law is mentioned in the Constitution. Due process of law is not mentioned directly in the Constitution, but still is a part of our principles. Clear on this? Remember this is very important. It could actually be asked in the pre as basic concepts that revolve around constitutional principles. Clear on this? So that's the idea. We create a constitution. We create a constitution based on certain principles. The principles are largely this. Okay. Now, let's now look at broadly the features of our constitution. For the purposes of the prelims, only these 4 features are absolutely essential. The rest are descriptive. They are data driven. You don't have to worry too much about it. What kind of questions are asked? Your questions are largely on 2 types: meaning and implication. Which means, what do these features mean? And what provisions or what systems in the Constitution, what legal ideas in the Constitution reflect these provisions? First, it's written and lengthy. You figured out why it's one of the lengthiest written constitutions in the world. It is not the lengthiest constitution it is in the world. It is one of the lengthiest constitutions in the world. Firstly, why was it written so heavily? Why was it written in such a long manner? It's because of the same reasons. India's imperial past, India's first federal structure, involuntary federal structure, and socio-economic conditions. We had to put everything down to the law. UK didn't have to. UK literacy rates were definitely higher than us. UK does not have a written constitution. A written constitution is easier, it's more stable, it allows for specific points to be written down. For example, I'm sure some of you might be living on rent. Why do you decide to have a written rent agreement? Why do you not trust the word of your landlord? Because the written agreement is powerful. It is valid in the eyes of law. Tomorrow, if something goes wrong, you have a piece of paper to show. This is my rent agreement. It says 1 month security deposit. You're cutting 2 months. There is something wrong. That's why you had to write a written constitution, a lengthier constitution in the country. Clear on this? The written and the lengthier constitution. So Indian constitution is lengthy. It is, in fact, one of the lengthiest constitutions in the world. And the reason it is so is primarily because of Indian local conditions that we've spoken about. Second, this is very, very interesting. Federal character. As we were saying this before, so what had largely happened was central government was formalized first, and then we decided to have the constituents of India, the federal units of India. And for the very same purpose, for the exact same purpose, we then decided to have state governments. Okay. The central government came before the state government. India is not a voluntary federation like the US. We've discussed this before. So states had to be convinced. Sometimes states had to be arm twisted. Sometimes they had to be quote unquote mildly but superficially coerced so that they're able to actually be an honorable part of this country. So you will see more often than not the federal character with the unitary bias, which means no doubt states have powers, but the center shall dominantly have more powers. Clear on this? For example, so there are some powers which are mentioned in the Constitution. They are mentioned in Schedule 7. These are basically a list of subjects, something on which the center can make laws, something on which the states can make laws, something on which both the center and the state can make laws. These are called the union list, the state list, and the concurrent list. If there is something which is not mentioned in either of these, in such a case, the center makes those laws. These are called residuary powers, and that is how it largely works. This is a simple example of a federal character with unitary bias. Clear on this? Now, rigid and flexible. This is a lot like your relationship with your parents. Your parents have a very strong opinion about a few things, and your parents are gradually going to be flexible about their opinion on a few other things. That will happen over with time. That's exactly how the Constitution works. There are certain things that the Constitution doesn't compromise with. It says nothing doing, this cannot ever be changed. Secularism, for example. But there are certain things the Constitution is willing to change, is open to change. There are certain things that can be changed very easily. There are certain things that require something bigger and of a higher power to change. Why does the Constitution do that? We're going to be discussing this, don't worry, in types of majorities and subsequently. But why do we do this? We largely do this for a very simple reason. Because the Constitution is an organic document. So, for example, let us say we have something called a basic structure, right? That cannot be changed. The parliamentary form of government, that cannot be changed. But let us say we want to alter the boundaries of certain states. We want to redraw the states. That you can do very easily. This also reflects the second principle, a stronger center, which we will get into eventually. But that's the larger idea. Certain things that we are dead about, certain things that we don't give in at all, rigid and flexible. And fourth, integrated judiciary. Rule of law is law basically made by the people through somebody called representatives. These are a part of something called parliament. These laws can sometimes be objectionable to the Constitution. We need somebody completely unbiased and a formal straight line of command from the bottom to the very top. So you have something called integrated judiciary. Clear on this? And that is largely why we do this. Did we do this because, Shashank has a very good question, did we do this because we followed British parliamentary sovereignty? We did this because the British parliamentary sovereignty suited us. Because a parliament basically means power in the hands of multiple MPs, not one person called the president. That is why we chose the British parliamentary format. Clear on this? And that's the larger idea. Clear on this? All right. So, an integrated judiciary basically means an independent, straight up change of command of courts in the country. And that is how it exactly works. We needed the Supreme Court, high court and lower courts of our country to be completely independent of everybody else so that they could function in isolation. Because a law or a judgment in the country is applicable to the entirety of the country. That is why you needed an integrated judiciary so that the parliament doesn't meddle with the affairs of the judiciary in effect. So, what kind of questions could largely be asked here? So, if I ask you, simple enough, if I ask you, the changes to citizenship laws in the country, this has been uh, in the news very recently in the form of something called CAA. This is reflective of which of the following principles? A for written and lengthy, B for federal character, C for rigid and flexible, and D for integrated judiciary. Yes, very good, Nena. Very good. Very good. Also good to see you, Sagar. Very nice to see you. Yes, the correct answer actually is B. Federal character with a unitary bias. Please understand why it is not rigid and flexible. What you're basically saying, it's easy to make citizenship law changes. Why is it easy to make citizenship laws changes? Please understand this. It is easy to make citizenship law changes because any change to format of Indian citizenship is exclusively decided by the central houses of the parliament. The states have absolutely no role in this. This is why the correct answer is B. If the states would have a role on determining citizenship provisions in the country, then India would have something called double citizenship, or you would not have a strong citizenship law like the one that we do. That is why the correct answer is B. The first thought would have been rigid and flexible, but you have to figure out why rigid and flexible. Clear on this? All right. I'll answer your question, Nena. Don't worry. So, what Nena is basically asking is, why does India have an integrated judiciary? I'll take 2 minutes and get you about with this. We basically talk about two features of the Indian judiciary. We say Indian judiciary is I square. It is integrated and it is independent. Let's understand both of these in the context of the fourth point. What do you mean by an integrated judiciary? It means a case from the lower court on appeal can go to the Supreme Court. It also means, yes, it also means, CA is an example of the flexible aspect, yes, which also means any judgment given by the Supreme Court is directly and fully applicable to all lower courts of the country. This is called integrated. Clear on this? Supreme Court, lower court, district court, high court, Supreme Court. They form one system of the judiciary. A case from here on appeal can go to the Supreme Court. Any judgment given by the Supreme Court is applicable to all lower courts of the country. All the previous judgments would stand overruled if that's the case. This answers integrated. Why does we do? Why does India do this? Why does India have an integrated judiciary? Because you want uniformity of laws in the country. Clear on this? If this was not the case, then when the Supreme Court says Section 377 of the Indian Penal Code no longer means homosexuality, it would not be applicable to all parts of the country. This is why we say it's integrated. Independent means in India, the representatives, which is called the parliament, and the majority party of the parliament gets to be a part of the executive. The legislature and the executive are not very, very separate from one another. There is a bias. They are essentially coming from the same origin. That's not the case in the judiciary. The judiciary is strongly apart. That's why it's called independent. Clear on this? If the budget fails, legislature, the Lok Sabha resigns. If there is no confidence motion in the Lok Sabha, the executive resigns. It's done. It's the end of it. Judge resigns, doesn't matter. Yes, E does come out of PL. Clear on this? Okay, so these are some broad features of the Constitution. You must know these features and you must know examples of these features because they would be asked in the exam. You can happily ignore all other features, they are not relevant for this exam. Clear? Now, this is going to start getting technical. Let's look at some basic background concepts. I'd like to teach you this through a simple example, through a simple illustration. I must also tell you, this illustration, I've actually borrowed it from a colleague of mine, Abhay, who teaches polity with us at Wajiram, an exceptional teacher at the Telegram channel as well. So he uses this, and I thought this is a very good way to explain it. So I would always give people credit whenever they do some amazing work. It's great work by him. So I'm using a table that he had made for the purposes of the class. Okay. So let's understand this in the context of majorities. Okay, let's see. Don't worry about the total strength, maximum strength. We're just looking at majorities to understand what they are. So, largely speaking, there are the following types of majorities. Okay, simple, absolute, effective, special, special 2, and special 3. So this is special 1, this is special 2, this is special 3. Let's see how this works. Let us say that there is a house called the Lok Sabha, and the Lok Sabha has 545 members. Okay, this is called the total strength of the house. You cannot have more than 545 members in the Lok Sabha under any circumstances as of today. Clear? Now, the three worst things that can happen to anybody as a member of parliament are they could either die, they could either be disqualified, or they might have to resign. DDR. Let us say that a total of 4 people have either died, disqualified, or have been resigned. Okay, we'll use the word effective here. We'll come back to this. Don't worry. Clear on this? 4. So we're taking 4 plus 3, a total of 7. Died, disqualified, or resigned, a total of 7. Okay, the illustration is here. Total 7. Clear? Now, let us say today there were in the Lok Sabha where your total strength is 545, a total of 300 MPs were present. Out of the 300 MPs, 270 were voting. That means 30 were not voting. Another vote for not voting is called abstention. The first question I must answer for you is why? Why would an MP be present in the House and not vote? Why could it be the case? Why would the Constitution even allow? Abstention is completely different from nota. Nota is when you vote in an election. This is abstention. This is when you're voting in the House. We're talking about majorities in the House. So none of the above is a tool in an election to an MP, not on the voting of the House. So don't confuse between the both, Shashwat. Don't worry. Okay. So basic question. An MP who's present in the Lok Sabha drags himself to the Lok Sabha, sits in the Lok Sabha, and then suddenly decides to not vote. Now, why would this happen? Why would this randomly happen? Why would an MP come but not vote? There's a very interesting answer to this. And why does the Constitution have provisioned for this? Dissent and freedom of expression. Yes, but there has to be something more important. You're not supposed to be neutral. Do you realize? There's something called defection law. You have to vote in a certain way. What does this mean? Why would the Constitution allow for this? The Constitution says, now let's understand this, okay? The Constitution originally provides for abstentions. There's a reason why. The reason is, for example, an MP has been chosen for 2 reasons. The ideology of the party that the MP comes from, and second, the individual personality of an MP, what the MP personally believes in. Now let's take a very, very simple example, okay? Let us say this MP is from BJP, and let us say is from the Vidarbha region of Maharashtra from the BJP. Okay. Now, in Vidarbha region, agriculture and farmer suicides are some of the key problems that exist. Okay, now the BJP has decided to bring in a law that provides for, it's very interesting, but provides for no interest free loans on agriculture. Plus, let us say agriculture will now be taxed. Hypothetically, let us say if there is a law like this that you will not get interest free loans on agriculture anymore, and your agriculture would be taxed. Now, this BJP MP is in a fix. Because if this BJP MP votes yes, he supports the BJP, but he loses his face, his individuality, he breaks the trust of the constituency. If he votes no, he betrays the very party that gave him the ticket, but safeguards his trust with the constituency. To balance this is exactly why an abstention existed in the constitution. This could actually work on a larger principle. For example, let us say there is a coalition government of, let us say, the BJP and let's take another party's name, let us say Samajwadi Party, hypothetically. Now, BJP is pro FDI in agriculture. Samajwadi Party, let us say, is anti FDI in agriculture. Both of them have formed a coalition. Let's call it Coalition 1. The law is on the parliament. If Samajwadi Party votes yes, they support the coalition, but they go against their constituencies. They vote no, they disrespect the government and the coalition, but they support the constituency. And this is the issue. That is why abstentions originally existed in the constitution. Nena, anti-defection law, which says you have to listen to the whip, was never an original part of the constitution. It was added later. The constitution originally respected and safeguarded the rights of an MP to always balance politics versus policy. It is anti-defection law which now takes away the freedom of expression from MPs. Originally, that was not the case. And this entire table is based on what was originally and what is even today the idea. Because today, you must understand that abstentions would rarely happen. Because if a whip has been issued, a whip is basically an order from the government or an order from your party to vote a certain way, and you have to follow it. If you don't follow it, you will be chucked out of the house. You would be disqualified as an MP. Are we clear on this? And that's exactly why. Abstentions existed in the first place. Yes, Shashwat, it's right. 52nd Amendment 1985 was through which the anti-defection law was actually inserted in the Constitution of India. So now do we understand why abstentions existed? Because abstentions originally always was supposed to protect the freedom of expression so that MPs could take the moral high ground. Because what might be politically right may not necessarily be right in the interest of the people. Today, the idea of an abstention is almost negligible. Clear on this? Yes. And the idea of the anti-defection law is against the spirit of parliamentary democracy, which is obviously the larger issue. If you look at reforms of the election commission that has been recommended, or the law commission, or the Dinesh Goswami committee, they've all said that certain key issues, certain issues that are not fundamental to the stability of the country, whips should not be issued for everything. Today, whips are issued on almost everything. An MP cannot vote against the party. So that's the idea. Do we now understand this clear enough? Do we understand the idea? Yes. Yes, you could say the same. Yes. All right. Now, simple enough. A total of 545 members, out of which 7 have been dead, disqualified, or resigned on day 1 in the Lok Sabha, where the total strength is 545. Only about 300 are present. Okay. And out of the 300, there are only 270 who are voting and about 30 who have abstained. Let's look at the kind of majorities. The first is simple majority. Okay. This is the largest used majority in the Constitution. If it is not mentioned what kind of majority in an article, please assume a simple majority. This is your default, your de facto majority. Clear on this? It is used for a wide range of things: passing of ordinary bills, the passing of the budget, confidence motion, largely things on the floor of the house. Okay, simple majority. It is simply nothing but 50% plus one of present and voting. Your present and voting figure is this. It is not this. It is not this. So on day one, your simple majority would be 50% plus one of 270, which is 136. Clear on this? Similarly, day two, if 480 members are voting, if you're voting, which means you're also present, you cannot be absent and voting. So if your 480 members are present and voting, in that case, it would be 50% plus 1 of 480, which is 241. Clear on this? This is simple majority, the most widely used term in the Constitution. Yes. Should one come outside bracket? Yes, I was just writing it in the process of it, so don't worry about it. 50% plus one. Don't worry about the bracket, and it's not worry. Yes, so 50% plus 270 plus one. Yes, you could do that, no problem at all. I didn't it that way. Maybe my maths equation formulation is not as brilliant as you, but I'm sorry. I'll keep that in mind the next time. Okay, so understand it is 50% plus one of 50% of 270 plus one. Okay. All right, don't worry about this. It is almost the same thing. When you calculate it, this is written in a way to explain. It is not a detail. When you actually do this in a mathematical way, it would be 50% of 270, and you would add 1. Okay. All right. Now, second is absolute majority. Absolute majority is not directly used to make any change, any law, or anything. Absolute majority is also called political majority. It is never required on its own, and it is always used with other kinds of majority. Okay, you use absolute majority to form government. We recently had the 2019 elections last year, and you would see the magic number is 273. So how does the magic number of 273 happen? It happens 50% plus 1, and we write it to explain 50% plus 1 of the total strength. So what is the total strength? So 50% of 545 plus one more vote. So 50% of 545 would be, let's say, 272 plus 1 is 273, which means you require at least 273 MPs to form government from a specific party in the Lok Sabha. Same way, doesn't matter what day or two, because this is on total strength. Absolute majority is on total strength. This is on present and voting. Clear on this? All right. Now, we look at third. This is where, let me also make it very clear, Lakshmikant is incorrect on this because it has not mentioned it clearly. This is the rule, this is the law. Please correct it in your books if you have it written differently. Okay, effective majority. Okay, let's understand how this works. So effective majority means 50% of effective strength plus 1. Now, what is effective strength? Effective strength is total strength minus total number of people who are dead, disqualified, or resigned. This is why their seats have been vacant. So, total strength minus vacancies is what is effective strength. Okay, so total strength minus B plus D plus R. Let's see how this works. Okay, total strength of the house is for 545. As we can see, total who are either resigned, who are either dead or have disqualified is 4 plus 3. So this would be 545 minus 7. Clear on this? Yes. So 50% plus 1 is how it is done. I will explain how absolute majority is used with special majority 4C. That's how absolute majority is used. So just give me some time. Are we clear on this? So 545 minus 7 would essentially be, how much is 545 minus 7? If you could help me with that. 538. Is it 538? Is it 538? Okay. All right. If you say it's 538. Clear? So 50% of 538 plus 1, that is 269. Now, it's the concept behind this which needs to be done properly. The only place, listen to this very carefully, the only place effective majority is actually used is for the removal of all presiding officers except the Vice President of India, all presiding officers of all houses, center and states included, except the Vice President of India, who happens to be the presiding officer for the Rajya Sabha. Now, your question should be why? Because the Speaker of the Lok Sabha, the Speaker of the Lok Sabha manages the entire Lok Sabha. Clear? It manages members who are a part of the Lok Sabha. Anybody who has died, has been disqualified, and has been resigned is not an active member of the Lok Sabha. It would be unfair to have their seats counted for removing the Speaker of the Lok Sabha because they have nothing to do with the Speaker. When you're not alive, you've resigned, or you have been disqualified, you're not a member of the House. When you're not an active member of the House, the Speaker has done nothing against you or for you. So your seat has no business being participated. Because if this was the case, if you added these seats, this would mean you would require a larger majority to remove the Lok Sabha Speaker. This is why you don't include your vacant seats in effective majority. Are we clear on this? Because presiding officers manage the House. Only those who are a part of the House should decide whether the Speaker gets to stay or gets chucked out. So, if somebody has died or has resigned or has been disqualified, in such a case, in such a scenario, your seat has no business being counted towards the majority to remove the Speaker because it would be invalid, it would be unfair, it would be illegal, and it would obviously be non-transparent. Do we understand this? Do we understand why effective majority is used to remove every presiding officer except the vice president? Because the vice president is not just the presiding officer of the Rajya Sabha, it is also the vice president of India and has a different recruitment procedure. Clear on this? Good. Excellent. So effective majority is this. Now, let's look at special. Now, let's look at the first kind of special. Okay. All right. So special majority 1. Special majority 1 is very simple. It is 2/3 of present and voting. Simple. That's it. Nothing more. 2/3 of present and voting of the House. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less. We use it in federalism related provisions. Okay, federalism related provisions. So this is 249 and 312 are special powers of the Rajya Sabha to authorize. Their authorization powers on multiple elements that the Rajya Sabha gets powers to. I don't want to confuse you at the very start of class. When we do Parliament, I will discuss 249 and 312 eventually with you. So don't worry about this. Okay, 312 is to add another civil service and another All India service, and 249 is authorizing the Parliament making a law on something on the state. Don't worry about this. It's basically 2/3 of present and voting. Okay, so simple majority was 50% of present and voting. Special majority is 2/3 of present and voting. Okay, so for example, 2/3 of in day one scenario would be 270, which is 180. Clear on this? Simple enough. Now, come to the second part, the special majority part 2. Right, special majority class. Now, this is used in cases which severely affect federalism directly. Okay, let's see how this works. It's a very interesting principle. Let's see and let's try to figure this out from a larger ecosystem. Okay, let's see. Sorry, there seems to be an academy notification. Right, so federalism, we're looking at special majority of the second type. This basically works in 2 principles. Let's look at the 2 principles as we can. Okay, let's see. The 2 basic principles are first, 2/3 of present and voting, you will get a figure X. Second, this figure X under no circumstances should be less than half of the total strength of the house, which means this figure, if it is the Lok Sabha, cannot be less, cannot be less than 273. Okay, yes, it does. It does. Clear? Okay. So, two-thirds of present and voting. Second, that whatever figure that you get as two-thirds of present and voting cannot be more. Has to minimum. Sorry, it has to be a minimum of. Has to always be greater than half of the total strength of the house, which means it always has to be greater than 273. And that's the larger problem that we are fighting. Okay, clear on this? So let us see how this works. I am getting a report that the audio is not clear. Can you please confirm the audio is clear? I just need a quick yes if the audio is clear, so that I'm getting notification that the audio is not clear. Is the audio clear? All right, perfect, perfect, perfect. Okay, thank you, thank you. Okay, got it. All right. So let me just take this up again because this is going to get slightly complex. Okay. Case two. Two-thirds of present and voting in such a way that this two-thirds is always more than half of the total strength of the house, which means this has to at least be 273. Okay, so let's look at this from the day one example. In day one, how many are present and voting? In day one, there are 270 which are present and voting. Two-thirds of 270 is 180. Okay, 180. This 180 is less than 273, so you don't have enough majority to pass this. You do not have enough majority to pass this. Are we clear on this? This is called special majority. Okay, special majority class 1. But in the second day, you have a total of 480 people present and voting. Two-thirds of 480 people is 320, which is more than 273. So on day 2, special majority will work, but on day 1, special majority, the second type, will not work. Okay. Now let's look at the third example, the one that we were discussing. Okay, let's get this right. Third, we are now looking at special majority. Third, it is only and only used in one case: presidential impeachment, or if you'd like to call it, presidential removal. Simple enough. It is two-thirds of total strength. That's it. Two-thirds of total strength. Nothing more, nothing less. Okay. So two-thirds of total strength would be 2 by 3 into 545. 363. This is the toughest majority ever needed, and it is only used to remove the president of India. Clear on this? There was a question. No, Supreme Court judges are not removed through two-thirds of the total membership. Supreme Court judges are actually removed in the same way as 4A, special majority, two-thirds of the members present and voting, and 4B, actually two-thirds of the members present and voting, such that the two-third members is no less than half of the total strength of the house. Okay, half of the total strength of the house. The Supreme Court judges get removed through 4B. President gets removed through 4C. Okay, clear on this? All right. Any issues with this so far? Good. So this basically means there are the following types of majorities. We'll quickly revise them once again. Simple majority is based on present and voting. Absolute majority is based on total strength. Effective majority is based on effective strength, which is total strength minus vacancies. Special majority class 1 is again based on, very simply, present and voting. Second is special majority part 2 is also based on present and voting. And special majority class C, the 4C part, is based on total strength of the House. Okay, you must know these because they may be asked in the exam. If majority is not mentioned in an article, then please assume simple majority. Yes, 4B and 4C are similar applications of absolute majority, but they're not direct absolute majority. They're based on it, they're higher versions of it or similar versions of it, but they're not direct. Directly absolute majority, as it is, 50% of the total strength of the House is not used anywhere except to form government. Okay, it will require 181, 40, 50% plus 1. So it's always 181. This is just an illustration to make you understand. Okay, all right. So these cover majorities. That's all that is needed. You don't have to worry about anything else. Clear? Okay. Are we clear on this? A minute to get any doubts if there are any. Could you please? Yes. What majority was tested during the floor test? Okay. Yashank, I'll come back to your question in a bit. What majority was tested? I'll come back to your question. Please keep that question on the safe. I'll come back towards the end of it. I need to cover a few more things. Okay. What majority was tested during the floor test of the after the Congress government fell in Karnataka last year? Obviously, absolute majority. You need the same majority to form government. Any majority that is required to form government is always absolute majority. The answer to this is undoubtedly absolute majority. Okay. All right. Now, pay attention to this. This will make a lot of things very, very easy for you. You will not have to look at most of the things at the newspapers after this. Just listen to this. See, civil laws and criminal laws are types of laws. Okay. But let's look at how are laws passed in different ways. Please pay attention to this. There are largely two kinds of laws. Laws that change the constitution, we call them constitutional amendments, or laws that don't affect the constitution. They have nothing to do with the constitution. The constitution continues the way it has to. This law makes no change to it. It is a change to made on any other law, any civil law or any criminal law, but not a constitutional law. Let's look at this. Any law that changes the constitution is largely of two kinds. Is it a serious law or is it a non-serious law? If it is a serious law, it is written under Article 368. If it is a non-serious law, it is outside Article 368. Usually, things that affect federalism seriously are mentioned under serious provisions of Article 368. Clear on this? Now, simple enough. Just listen to this. If a law is under Article 368, you need to ask the next layer of questions. Is it affecting the states or is it not affecting the states? If it's affecting the states, do I need to ask the states for passing that law, or do I don't need to ask the states for passing the law? Which let me run through this table again. There are two kinds of laws: laws that change the constitution, laws that don't do anything to the constitution. A constitutional amendment is of two kinds: a serious one and a non-serious one. The serious one is mentioned under Article 368. A non-serious one is outside Article 368. A serious one under Article 368, which means two further questions have to be asked. Is it affecting the states or is it not affecting the states? If it is affecting the states, you need to ask two more questions. To pass that constitutional law, do I need to ask the states or do I not need to ask the states? If something is in the concurrent list, you don't need to ask the states. For everything else, you need to ask the state. Clear? Simple enough. So let's look at this. Any problem? Good. Now, laws that don't amend the constitution are largely ordinary, money, and financial. I'll repeat this again: ordinary, money, and financial. Ordinary means something new. Money means something that requires money. Financial means something new that requires paisa, that requires money. For UPSC, Financial Bill 1 and 2, the difference between Financial Bill 1 and 2 is not in your syllabus. Please don't bother reading it. You will never be asked a question on this. Here. Now, these are the kind of laws. Now, once we know that these are the kind of laws, we must now plot the majorities to these laws. Now, pay attention. See how this works. Okay. Now, everything outside Article 368 requires only and only simple majority. Whether it's a constitutional amendment outside Article 368 or a money bill, ordinary bill, or a financial bill, it only and only requires simple majority. Clear? Now, if it is a constitutional amendment under Article 368, but it does not affect the states, then you require special majority class 1. Okay? If it is affecting states, you need to ask two more questions. Do you need to ask or do you not need to ask? If you don't need to ask, you again require special majority class 1. But if you need to ask, then you would require special majority class 2. This is without state ratification, and this is with state ratification. Clear on this? So let's understand this from a larger context. ठीक है, देखो क्या हो रहा है. बहुत ध्यान. State ratification मतलब 2/3 आपने पास करा, and half of the states have passed the same law. Half of the states have passed the same law through a simple majority. उसको बोलते हैं state ratification. मैं example से बताता हूँ. ठीक है, चलो एक बहुत simple example लेते हैं. Have you heard of something called the National Medical Commission? Yes, it was recently passed in 2019. Yes. Now, does the National Medical Commission, let's put this on this table. Is it a law that changes the constitution or not? No, it has nothing to do with the constitution. Okay. It is a law which has nothing to do with the constitution. Now, is it an ordinary bill, money bill, or a financial bill? Is it something new? Yes. Will it require money? Yes, the members of the NMC will have to be paid salary. So is it something new? Yes. Does it require money? Yes. Clear on this? So if it is new and it requires money, it becomes a financial bill. Okay. Clear on this? This is what is called a financial bill. Take another example. Okay. Let us say the example of increasing the number of Supreme Court judges. Now, it may seem like it is in the Constitution, but it's actually not. The Parliament has the power to make changes to the Supreme Court because democracy, because democratic mandate. Clear on this? So, in such a case, number of Supreme Court judges, simple. Is it something new? Yes. Will new judges require new salary in the form of money? Yes. It is something new plus money, financial bill. Clear? CAA. Does it affect the Constitution? No. Is there any change to the Constitution? No. Is it something new? Yes. Does it require money? No. So automatically money and financial is out. It is ordinary. Clear on this? If I have to write this down on a piece of paper for you, it is very simple. Something new is ordinary. Something which requires money is money. Something new which requires money is financial. Okay? Clear? Okay? So these are the kinds. Now, you've discussed this. You require a simple majority here, special majority class 1 here, special majority class 1 here, and you require special majority class 2 here. Let's come back to this. Let's take any other constitutional amendment. A money bill would be, for example, increasing the salary of existing Supreme Court judges. Outside the Constitution, is it something new? Are new judges coming in? No. So automatically financial is out. So money bill. Okay? Then is it clear? Do you understand? Increasing the salary of Supreme Court judges is an example of money bill. Okay. Now let's stick to a judiciary example. Heard of something called the National Judicial Appointments Commission? Yes. Yes. Have you heard of National Judicial Appointments Commission? It is a law that doesn't exist anymore. That law was supposed to change the way Supreme Court judges were to be appointed, transferred. Okay. Now, is it a constitutional amendment? Yes. Is it a serious one? Yes. Does it affect states? Yes. Do you need to ask states? Yes. Because law and order is in the state subject. So what kind of majority was needed to pass NJAC, which doesn't exist anymore? It was declared invalid by the Supreme Court. It required special majority class 2, which means 2/3 of present and voting, such that this number is always more than half of the total strength of the House, in such a way that it is more than half of the total strength of the House, and the same is sent to half of the state legislators for ratification through simple majority. A similar example I can give you here is again on heard of something called Panchayati Raj 73rd, 74th Amendment, Panchayati and Municipalities. Nana, the problem with Aadhaar being a money bill was actually a matter of concern. Because you are not only recruiting Supreme Court judges, promoting Supreme Court judges, you are also transferring High Court judges, which is why it was affecting states. Aadhaar was declared to be a money bill because you were not adding new provisions to it, but you were providing for subsidies to be linked to Aadhaar, which come out of the Consolidated Fund of India, and you would require a data registry for those subsidies, which is why it was needed. Clear on this? Now, let's look at it from a larger perspective. Okay, heard of something called the 73rd and the 74th Amendment? Have you heard of 73rd Amendment? Has everybody heard of 73rd Amendment? Please say yes if you have. Excellent. Does it change the constitution? Yes. Is it under article? Is it a serious one? Yes. Does Panchayati Raj affect states? Yes. Do you need to ask states? Yes. Because local self-government is in the state list. Yes, NJAC was also for High Court judges. Yes. Are we clear on this? Nana, is this okay? Okay. All right. Now, have we understood the 73rd example? Good. Now let me give you another example. Very good example that you would possibly relate. Heard of something called Article 21A, right to education? Yes. 86th Constitutional Amendment 2002. Anyone? Has anyone heard of this? Yes or no? Yes, 86th. Good. 86th Constitutional Amendment 2002. Did it change the Constitution? Yes. Was it a serious change? Yes. Does it affect states? Yes. Did you need to ask states? No. Because education is in the concurrent list. So what kind of majority was required for Article 21A? Just special majority, class 1. 2/3 of present and voting in such a way it is always more than half of the total strength of the House. Number, even it's from a DPSP, it has to be implemented like any other law. If it's a constitutional law, it will be subjected to constitutional provisions. Do we understand why it was special majority for 21A? Because it was in the state list. Okay. Local self-government was in the state list. Education was in the concurrent list. It was in the state list. Panchayati Raj was in the state list, so you needed to ask the states. Education was in the concurrent list, so you did not need to ask the states. Are we clear on this? Is it simple enough? Do we understand this? Have we understood the right ways to pass a law? Good. Very good. Excellent. Now, the most important part. Pay as much attention as you can to this. If you get this right, you will not have a problem studying the law. Everything from the preamble to the 12th schedule is an application of 4 basic rules to the Constitution. We'll go rule by rule. We'll apply the rules to a certain set of examples and see how the rules work. Rule number 1, democratic mandate. This means before performing a higher democratic function, a minimum democratic mandate is essential. इसका बड़ा सिंपल मतलब है, दुनिया उखाड़ने के पहले खुद तो उखाड़ के दिखाओ, बाकी हम देख लेंगे. Whatever function you have to make on behalf of the country, on behalf of the state, of the center, before you perform that function, you must have the capacity or the mandate to perform that function. मतलब इसका उल्टा भी सही है कि अगर democratic mandate नहीं है, if you don't have the democratic mandate, that you cannot perform the higher democratic function, it is incompetent, it is incomplete. Before you perform a higher democratic function, a minimum democratic mandate is essential. If you don't have the democratic mandate, then you can't carry out that function. The corollary is true. ये यहाँ तक सबको समझ में आ रहा है कि अगर कोई भी फंक्शन करना चाहते हो डेमोक्रेटिक फंक्शन, तुम्हारे पास वो फंक्शन करने की पावर होनी चाहिए. You must have the mandate to perform a function before you perform a function. A simple example. ठीक है? To be a minister, you must be an MP. If not today, but within 6 months, you must be an MP. ये बहुत जरूरी है. एक मिनिस्टर बनने के लिए एक एमपी होना बहुत जरूरी है, because your higher democratic function is that you are a minister. You're a minister. Clear on this? That's your higher democratic function. But before you perform the higher democratic function, you yourself must have the mandate of being an MP. A higher democratic function means any function that you're performing as an institution, as an authority on behalf of people. A minister's higher democratic function is that you're executing and formulating policies on behalf of the country. If you're somebody who's executing and formulating policies on behalf of this country, you must have the right to do that. You must have the capacity to do that. And for that, you have to be an MP. If not now, within 6 months. Doesn't matter. You could be a Rajya Sabha MP also. Because even when Arun Jaitley was Rajya Sabha MP, and when he became the finance minister, it was the majority of the Lok Sabha that wanted Arun Jaitley to become the finance minister. समझ में आया ये? Clear? ठीक है. Take the second example. If the rule is true, the corollary of the rule is also true. Okay? The recommendations of the Finance Commission of India are not binding on the government. Q. Why is this the case? Why are recommendations of most bodies not binding on the government? In fact, recommendations of any body is not binding on the government. Why does this happen? Because the Finance Commission of India is not an elected body. It is an appointed body. An appointed body cannot tell the elected government how to formulate financial policy. This is why recommendations of the Finance Commission of India are not binding on the government. Third, but an interesting example. This is a difficult example. Article 123 of the Constitution, okay, is called an ordinance. right? An ordinance is basically a temporary law which is drafted by the Council of Ministers, signed by the President in the absence of the Parliament. डोंट वरी, हम इसको डिटेल में बाद में करेंगे. एक एग्जांपल है कि अगर पार्लियामेंट नहीं है, जैसे निर्भया का केस था, ठीक है, when the Nirbhaya, the horrific incident of the Nirbhaya gang rape happened, there was a huge demand uh, to make sure that India has safer laws for women, India has more proactive laws for women. तो एक कमेटी बिठाई गई और हमने एकदम in a span of a few weeks, we had certain changes that we wanted to make to criminal laws in the country, uh, so as to criminalize stalking, voyeurism, and make certain harassment laws gender neutral. Okay. Now, very interestingly, in that context, Parliament to thi nahi. So, Council of Ministers very instantly drafted an ordinance, sent it to the President. The President signed off on it, and it became a law. Clear on this? Now, here's the thing. Why do the Council of Ministers get the powers to draft an ordinance? An ordinance is a law. Okay? India's highest lawmaking authority is the Parliament. The Parliament is not available. The next best alternative is Council of Ministers. Do they have the mandate? Yes, because they are MPs. Why is it a temporary law? Because India's final lawmaking authority is always the Parliament. Do you now understand rule number one? This is rule number one. ये आपका मिनिस्टर में भी लग गया, फाइनेंस कमीशन में भी लग गया और ऑर्डिनेंस में भी लग गया. Have we all understood what rule number one is? Democratic mandate. Have we understood this? Yes or no? समझ में आया? Please tell me yes or no. Good. Now we move to rule number two. Federalism. Okay. Now some of you may have an elder sibling, some of you may have a younger sibling, some of you may have no sibling. ये बिल्कुल वैसा ही है. This is the relationship between an elder sibling and a younger sibling. The younger sibling will always bully the younger sibling will always get bullied by the elder sibling. The elder sibling will always beat the younger sibling to pulp. And whenever the elder sibling is bullying the younger sibling to pulp, after beating the younger sibling, scared that the younger sibling will go complain to the parents, the elder sibling will do something nice for the younger sibling. But it will not be something very actually nice. It will be something which will be a superficial idea. Clear on this? So we need to understand this in the larger ecosystem. Whenever there is a conflict between the center and the states, the center shall overpower the states. Hamesha. Whenever there is a conflict between the center and the states, the center shall overpower the states. The states will be bullied. To make the states feel good, the center will give them a superficial appeasement, a candy dealing. All the little states, beta pura mat mano. Holy hai. And that candy will actually be a hollow candy, a meaningless candy. This rule actually has three parts to it. One, how is the center stronger than the states? Two, where is the candy? Three, how is the candy hollow? Clear on this? Try करके देखते हैं. Example number one. All India services, IS, IPS, Indian Forest Services. Recruited by the center, majorly working at the states. मतलब हमने IS recruit करा और state में भेज दिया और state को बोला भाई collector तो यही होगा. So majorly working at the states. So center stronger than the states. Candy क्या है? Candy ये है. Any addition or subtraction to all India services can only happen through a resolution passed by the Rajya Sabha. How is it a hollow candy? ये मतलब खाली क्यों है? How does it make no difference? Because a resolution passed by the Rajya Sabha makes no difference. Why was the resolution passed by the Rajya Sabha? Because Rajya Sabha is the representative of the states. ताकि उनको अच्छा लगे कि somebody who's representing you has told us we should make changes to all India services. How is this hollow? It is primarily hollow because, for very simple, it is primarily hollow because, let's understand this, it is primarily hollow because a resolution passed by the Rajya Sabha doesn't mean anything. The Rajya Sabha has just said that yes, we should do it. But it has to then be passed by as a proper law by both the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha. हाँ, permission Rajya Sabha से शुरू हुआ है, initiative Rajya Sabha से शुरू हुआ है. But it has to eventually be passed by both the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha, which is also the case with state legislative councils. The same thing, exactly the same thing as state legislative councils. And what happens with state legislative councils is actually this. The final authority on whether state legislative council should exist or not is the parliament. Center stronger than the states. The candy is the request for whether a state should have a state legislative council, the second house at the states, that should come from the states. How is it hollow? Because it is not binding on the center. It is hollow. Take a more difficult example. A more aggressive version of all India services is governor, recruited by the center, always working at the states. मतलब हमने स्टेट्स को बुलाया, हमने कहा ये आपके साथ जाएंगे, This is a return gift from us. And this person will be our representative at the states. One of the candies, there are many complicated candies, we'll do it when we do the governor properly, but one of the candies is when the president appoints the governor, the president must speak to the chief minister of the state. How is it hollow? Any advice given by the chief minister is not binding on the president of India. Okay? Take a difficult example, a combination of rule number 1 and rule number 2. In a presidential election, elected members of Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha and state legislative assemblies participate. Okay. Elected members of the center and states participate. Why elected members? Why do nominated members not participate? Because of rule number 1. Nominated members don't have the elected mandate to do so. Clear on this? That is why only elected members participate. But in a presidential impeachment, only the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha participate, but elected and nominated members both. We will do this in detail when we do presidential election, but just to give an explanation to this rule, the center participates in the election and the impeachment of the president, but the states participate only and only in the election and not the impeachment. Candy क्या है? Candy ये है, very simple candy. The candy is Rajya Sabha participate, which is a representative of the states. Why is it hollow? Because you would still require a tough majority in the Lok Sabha to get it done. And if the Lok Sabha doesn't want the president to be out, there is no way the president can be out. Because as you discussed, the toughest majority needed is for the president. इसके बहुत complicated भी reasons है कि हमने states को ऐसे क्यों करा है, because the president has the power of 356 to impose emergency. तभी हमने कहा कि अगर president के पास emergency लगा के state बंद करने की power है, तो states को president के election में part लेना चाहिए. ये आपने कैंडी दी. ये hollow क्यों है? Because even in a presidential election, एक MP का vote is always more than an MLA's vote. ठीक है? So we'll do this in detail. But do you largely understand rule number 2? कि भाई center और states में हमेशा conflict होगा. Whenever there is a conflict, the center will be stronger than the states. और states को हम एक छोटी सी कैंडी दे देंगे खेलने के लिए. Money bill में भी यही है. A money bill is only and only passed by the Lok Sabha, does not get passed in the Rajya Sabha. Center stronger than the states. The candy is the Rajya Sabha gets to play with it for 14 days. How is it a hollow candy? Anything the Rajya Sabha does to the money bill for 14 days is not binding on the Lok Sabha. Clear on this? Okay. When I discuss the president, I will tell you whether a money bill can be rejected by the president or not. Don't worry. This is not a discussion on the president. This is to give you an overview of things. Okay. Rule number 3 and 4 साथ में करेंगे. बहुत interesting है. We've all gone to school. School में दो तरह की चीजें होती थी. Inter-school competitions and intra-school competitions. Inter-school competitions and intra-school competitions. ये जो आप देख रहे हो आपके सामने L, E और J, ये आपके schools हैं. जो इंट्रा स्कूल कॉम्पिटिशन्स होते थे वो आपके इंटर हाउस कॉम्पिटिशन्स होते थे. इनके हाउसेस हैं. स्कूल्स में छोटे छोटे हाउसेस हैं. लोकसभा एंड राज्यसभा. इलेक्टेड एग्जीक्यूटिव मतलब मंत्री या मिनिस्टर. परमानेंट एग्जीक्यूटिव मतलब ऑफिशियल. ओके. जुडिशरी हैज सुप्रीम कोर्ट एंड अदर कोर्ट्स. अब ध्यान सुनना. रूल नंबर 3 इज सेपरेशन ऑफ पावर्स. दिस मींस इंटर सेपरेशन ऑफ पावर्स एंड इंट्रा सेपरेशन ऑफ पावर्स. इंटर सेपरेशन ऑफ पावर्स मतलब LENJ are kept away from one another as much as possible. Inter-separation of powers matlab, as much as possible, Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha should be kept separate. Elected and permanent executive should be kept separate. Supreme Court and other courts must be kept separate. ये एक बहुत basic फंडा है. That's nothing but this is the basic idea behind this. Checks and balances matlab, LENJ will keep a check on one another. Will keep a simple check on one another. Okay, clear? No problem. Will keep a check on one another. Inter checks and balances matlab, as much as possible, Lok Sabha will be more powerful than the Rajya Sabha, will keep a supervisory check because of rule number 2. The elected executive will be having a supervisory power over the permanent executive because of rule number 1. Elected executive is elected, permanent is appointed. And the Supreme Court will have a superior power over other courts because of legal hierarchy. Most of the things that we study in the Constitution is an application of this. Ek example deta hu. Judge removal. A Supreme Court judge can only be removed through a parliamentary process. ये क्या हुआ? Judiciary, legislature. Inter checks and balances. The conduct of a judge cannot be discussed on the floor of the parliament. The conduct of a judge cannot be discussed on the floor of the parliament. आपने conduct अलग रखा है. आपने कहा कि हम आपस में बात नहीं करेंगे. It will be inter separation of powers. Clear? The conduct of an MP cannot be discussed inside a courtroom. Again, inter-separation of powers. Writ of mandamus. A writ issued by the judiciary to the executive. inter-checks and balances. Constitutional bodies, which are basically permanent executive plus special powers, keeping a check on the executive and the legislature if the need might be, but permanently on the executive, is intra checks and balances. जब भी जॉइंट सेशन होगा तब स्पीकर हमेशा फर्स्ट प्रायोरिटी हो गया बिकॉज ऑफ इंट्रा चेक्स एंड बैलेंसेस. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, एक्सेप्ट फॉर काउंसिल ऑफ मिनिस्टर्स एंड अटॉर्नी जनरल, इन दोनों को छोड़ के a Lok Sabha member cannot sit in the Rajya Sabha and the Rajya Sabha member cannot sit in the Lok Sabha. ठीक है? This is an example of intra-separation of powers. Okay? So, a Supreme Court judge can only be removed through a process of the parliament. This is the parliament or the legislature keeping a check on the judiciary. Clear on this? Okay? ठीक है? So, this is inter-checks and balances. Mandamus again is the judiciary telling the executive to do or not to do something, which is again inter checks and balances. Clear? अब कुछ भी पढ़ लो, कल हम टेरिटरी करेंगे, प्रियम्बल करेंगे, सिटीजनशिप करेंगे, सारे इट गोइंग टू बी बेस्ड ऑन दीस फोर थिंग्स. अगर मैं बोलूं, एन अटॉर्नी जनरल कैन नॉट वोट ऑन द फ्लोर ऑफ द हाउस, द अटॉर्नी जनरल कैन नॉट वोट ऑन द फ्लोर ऑफ द हाउस. इट कैन पार्टिसिपेट. क्यों? बिकॉज ऑफ रूल नंबर 1. द अटॉर्नी जनरल इज एन appointed body, not an elected body. Excellent है ना? समझ में आया? Is it interesting enough? मजा आया कि नहीं? कि यार पूरी की पूरी कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन सिर्फ ये 4 रूल्स पे है. The speaker has to necessarily be a member of the house. Why? Because of rule number 1, democratic mandate. Residuary powers will necessarily be with the union because again, rule number 2, center stronger than the states. ठीक है? So we'll end the class here. I will upload the PPT of the class on the discussion portal for you to go through. All right, and you can go back to it, go through it. You can send me your questions if there is any, and you can post the question in the discussion forum. I'll be happy to answer them for you. Thank you so much for being so up late with me. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It was so nice to see everybody, some new students, some old students from Vajiram, from inside, from everywhere. It has been a pleasure. Thank you so much, and I will see you tomorrow at 9:30. Thank you. Bye-bye.